Thanks so much, Stephen. It's not every day that we see a rock concert as part of our workday. Hi, everyone. I'm Devin Cook. I'm the Acting Associate Director for the IDE, and it is my pleasure to introduce our next segment, a fireside chat with Jessica Tan, who's the Group Co-CEO of the Ping On Group. And our Summit Co-Chair, Peter Evans, will be moderating the conversation. So there'll be further introductions in the video. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to Jessica Tan. Jessica is the Co-CEO, Chief Operations Officer, and Chief Information Officer of the Ping An Insurance Group of China. She's also the Chairwoman of Ping An Technology, managing 10 of the internet and platform businesses under the group. She's also serving on the board of directors of over 10 subsidiaries of Ping An, including Ping An Bank. Jessica was a former partner with McKinsey & Company and head of the financial services and business technology of Southeast Asia for McKinsey. She worked for McKinsey for 13 years. Jessica graduated from MIT with a master's in engineering, in electrical engineering and computer science, and she has 2 bachelor's degrees in electrical engineering and economics. So thank you very much. Since we have a large group of attendees at this summit that are affiliated or graduated from MIT, I thought it might be fun to start there and ask you a little bit about your time at MIT. What were your challenges, and what did you bring back that you found particularly valuable in the work that you're doing now?
So yeah, MIT was a very interesting and breakthrough time for me. It was my first time to the States. So I grew up and studied in Singapore. First came to MIT, I was had to adjust to the culture and the way so just the whole environment is. So it was quite challenging. Because I wasn't sure what to expect. It was actually my second time on the plane. But I think I grew to love it. It was fantastic. It was one of the best experiences I had in my life. It was very tough because I was an international student on financial aid. It was also during the financial crisis. So I had to, in addition to the financial aid, have 3 jobs on campus. And it was a very tough academic environment as well. But it was wonderful. The support that I had, I was just amazed. It truly embraces what I think the US and the MIT culture is, where I think there was needs lines of financial aid. My advisor was really open. I remember my, as an undergraduate, I went to, I looked up and I went to Professor Herman House, at that time, was very famous. And I told him I wanted to do my master's thesis with him. And he said, I don't take undergraduate student, but so you came as a surprise, but why don't you come back, the day after? And he took me for my master's thesis, and it was very nice. He tried to structure something for me. We had host family to help us get adapted and stuff. So I was really amazed by the type of open environment. It encouraged me to really, what I learned, because growing up in Asia, we have a much more rigid education system. And I think it allows me to do many interesting things. And there were advisors who basically, asked me to do whatever I want to. I absolutely loved it.
Fantastic. So most people are very familiar with Alibaba and Tencent, but maybe less familiar with Ping An. Can you just take a few minutes to explain what is similar and what is different, and the core businesses that Ping An is engaged in?
Sure. Ali, Tencent, and many of the internet companies are much more about, it started off as a consumer internet company. And then over time, on their platform, they grow their ecosystems very much centered around their own consumers, right? For us, Ping An is a bit different. We started off as a financial services company. You know that and that over time, we took financial services and technology, which was both enablers, into 5 ecosystems. So we see ourselves as an enabler. So our ecosystem is much more open. I will think of it as basically like a hub and spoke type of model in various ecosystems, whereby I think now we have a total of about 10 technology companies. We cover about 564 million users in China right now, and it's across deep verticals. We have 5 verticals, from financial services to health, to car, housing and smart city. And these are areas whereby we will become very deep. And each of these ecosystem, we have two aspects. One is that we have our own B2C, which is kind of like a flagship. So, for example, Good Doctor, Auto Home, these are the largest health and car portals in China. But more importantly, we also have a B2B kind of franchise. And I think that's what's unique about us, whereby we believe the online and the offline have to merge significantly. Offline anyway is our core competence. So in addition to us having Good Doctor, we have actually a smart healthcare that basically enable 170,000 hospitals and medical institutions, over 300,000 doctors, right? So it's kind of we have a flagship, but then we would also use a technology to enable the whole ecosystem, because we believe the bulk of the economy in all these sectors are actually still in the offline system, right? I mean, if you look at financial services, you see from many of the publications in China is one of the most developed in terms of internet finance and etc. But even that still constitute, less than 10-15% of the entire financial services. It's still in the bulk, in the offline financial services institutions. So what we have, for example, is a company, and it's actually listed actually in New York, called One Connect, that we created about 4.5 years ago, whereby we took all our core fintech technology and then we put it into a fintech SaaS software as a service platform, and we now provide to 3,000 financial institutions in China and 10 countries outside of China. And that because we really believe that for the rest of the bulk of the financial system, they also need to digitally enable, right, in order to better serve their customers. And so we go for tech enablement, and that's very different, I think, from some of the internet type of ecosystems you see, which is very much centered around their own consumers.
Gotcha. So when you look at some of the conditions in China, some of the institutions are quite weak. And it's been interesting to look at, for example, Alibaba had to actually invent solutions like Alipay, because there was no credit and there wasn't really a system to be able to accept payments. And so they invented Alipay. So ironically, some of the market failures or the weaknesses of institutions actually created an opportunity for some of the big internet companies to really invent in it. So I'm curious, in the case of Ping An, did you also face a situation where there was kind of gaps in the marketplace that you were able to come in and fill?
Yeah, so it's true. I think it's most of our business we have a 4-step in any of our 10 businesses. The first stage is really always about identifying the use case or the unmet needs, if you will, right? I think that's what you mean by market failures. And then once we have proven a specific value proposition, that's when we will try to scale it up. Then we try to monetize from revenue standpoint before we become profitable. So all our companies go through these 4 stages of development. So I'll give our healthcare example to show how that goes through. So our healthcare, we really have 2 flagships, if you will, right? One is Good Doctor, I mentioned, which is kind of the largest health portal. And the unmet need here, and the other part is really the offline part, which is in our smart healthcare that I mentioned. In both cases, you have to look for what the the pain points is in the system, right? So for Good Doctor, started about 6 years ago. If you look at the healthcare delivery system in China, one of the problems is the lack of primary healthcare that's accessible. Right. So healthcare is quite affordable here because there are government stipulated prices, but everyone crowds to basically these tier 3, class 3 hospitals. So 8% of the class 3 hospitals basically constitute 50% of all the visits, and we really believed that at that time there has to be a better way because 82% of the things that you get small cold, fever, these things can be done, frankly, much more easily accessible. And we believe that online was really a good way of doing it. So we started with that need in mind, and then created Good Doctor. So I first hired 1,000 doctors. We started to offer reliable, accessible, better service healthcare on telemedicine. And then now we've become the largest. And during the COVID, you'll see that actually this took off 10 times because people don't want to go to the hospitals for risk of infection and others. And now we are not just in China, but also in places like Indonesia, in Japan and others. So that would be one example of kind of the need that you get in the consumer. There's another example that I'll give also in the healthcare example where I said that, we do the, which is the more unique aspect of the B2B enablement, which is then in the rest of the hospital institution, because no matter how good online health education, telemedicine is, it still represents only about 3-4% of the entire market. Right? So even after 6+ years of us really working at it, it's still 3-4%. I believe the ratio is also under 10% in the US, right? So there's still the rest. So what do you do with the rest of the consumers and the hospitals and the doctors? And there's a severe lack of basically good experienced doctors, right? So if you look at it in China, there's about 8 million doctors and medical staff, right? And not all of them have the same quality, especially if you go to tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities. So what we then create with our technology, invest a lot is, over the past 15 years, we've built basically these knowledge graphs and maps about, very good databases about, 30,000 different types of diseases, all the symptoms that they have, the right clinical pathways, different medication that you have, etc. And we created a series of, in our smart healthcare company, a series of ASBOBs, right? That's the name of our product. We have a AI clinical decision support system that basically serves doctors. We have an AI medical imaging system that serves all the radiologists and stuff. We also have one that basically helps hospitals better manage their systems. So the doctors one, for example, is quite interesting. We had a little kind of competition with one of the top universities here a few years ago, just to show how it is. We took 3 groups of basically GPs. The first group GP completely untrained. The second group of GP, we trained them first how to recognize one disease, atrial fibrillation. And then the third one, we let them use our tool. They got trained and they use our tool. And it's interesting, within half hour, they had to do 6 cases. The first untrained case only had a mark of 100 marks of basically 15 to 20 marks. So because they don't see atrial fibrillation a lot, it's very difficult to diagnose and pick up the symptoms. So very high barriers. The second group, which was trained just a while ago, had 51 marks. And the variance was very significant. But the one with our tool, because it has really recorded all the various cases, all the right symptoms, etc., basically had 86 marks. I think this is an example of how the second part of our thing, where we looked at fundamental structural problems in the offline healthcare ecosystems, be it by institutions, doctors, and radiologists, and then try to use technology to complement the lack of basically very experienced, skilled professionals, right? Because there's a bottleneck to this, not just in China, but in many, many places. You see that. So today, I think in just 2 years, we now have 15% of the doctors using our AI clinical decision support system to help raise their awareness and stuff. So I think these two are examples whereby, and it also speaks to your earlier question of what's unique about Ping An's ecosystem, right? Our philosophy is very different. Using a healthcare example, we not only build our own flagship, right, where we become the best, the largest online healthcare provider, but we also care about the rest, 90% of the healthcare institutions, and how do we use our experience, our domain knowledge in health, as well as our technology in the platform to enable them and help them do better, right? And that's how we do in healthcare. It's the same what I talked about in financial services for One Connect, whereby even though we are a competitor ourselves, we serve the other 3,000 financial institutions so that they could be better too.
Right. So those doctors, are they doing this on a freelance part-time basis, or are they full-time on your network?
You mean on Good Doctor?
Yeah.
So we have two types. So when we first started Good Doctor 6 years ago, we were not the first telehealth kind of app or portal in China. In fact, we were quite late. But one of the problems we saw was that, look, healthcare is about trust. It's about professionalism, right? And then maybe thirdly, you have service, right? So the first thing we did was actually we hired our own doctors. That was the reason why we really started very fast, because we built a reputation. Not only we have our own doctors who have to follow our clinical kind of pathways, they use our own AI tools and stuff. So at the beginning, it was a really simple model. We just have doctors full-time. We hire 1,000 of them, and they answer questions online through chat or through video. And we made sure it was the right quality. We even had our insurance basically provide basically liability insurance, right? Should there be misdiagnostics or whatsoever, our insurance will pay for it. So I think that's how we started to build, our credibility. It also allows us to build our AI clinical decision support system, because at the beginning, you can't create AI stuff out of nothing. So, at first it was 100% answered by humans. And then now after 6 years, we now have about, I need to convert all the units in English, 670,000 consultations a day.
Wow.
So now 75% of them is answered by our AI doctor assistant. Because over the years we've already codified, well, if you said that my kid has a fever, there's a set of standard triaging questions and pathways that will kind of do that before you actually see a doctor. And so that's how we build it. And then now we have our own doctors. We also have part-time doctors, but the bulk actually is our own doctors. But we have a network of about 5,000 doctors that we work closely with. They will be much more the specialist type of doctors, whereby we might refer to them. They do it on a part-time basis. They may do second opinions and stuff.
I see. And then the system does the scheduling of so a particular patient may see a different doctor each time they. Yeah. I see. Very interesting.
Yeah. Well, we're trying also a new concept. So when you have 670,000 people, it's easier to schedule a problem. The queue optimization is slightly easier. The other thing is that we also allow users over the time, they can pay for their own family doctor. So we have these things called family physician, whereby your whole family, you always go back to the same doctor. And this doctor has basically like a team, it's like a team serving you, right? So there's a key physician. They have assistants, of course, assisted by the AI as well. So you always get referred to the same person.
Gotcha. And when you're dealing with a system of this scale, do you worry about it becoming bureaucratic at all? Or are you still able to have that connection with the customer?
Yeah, it's a really tough one because we are not because of our uniqueness, where I said we have verticals, it requires really deep specialization, right? And our users are not one of the same, right? It's not like we're an e-commerce platform whereby the users are very homogeneous. They come to buy things, and then you have one type of algorithm and stuff. So the challenge for us and complexity, as you point out, is not just the scale, but the depth and the diversity of the users that we have. So our 564 million users, come in for health, to buy cars. 76% of the cars sold in China go through us. They come for wealth management. They want to get loan, education. So that's the complexity of how you manage them. So we think of ourselves about 5 years ago, we started to build what we call this Anyway door. It actually comes from a Japanese Doraemon kind of anime. You can go to anywhere. So the concept really is that we think of ourselves as a large, huge department store, right? And users could come in, to shop for, let's say, health or some things. But then on the front page of our app, there is all a standard widget, right? It's colorful tablets, like little, kind of boxes on the first page of any of our apps. And it allows you to switch to any of the other kind of verticals with just one click. Right.
Wow.
So the idea is, for example, if you're at our auto home, right, which is and you were looking for cars and stuff, and then we know that your car insurance is going to expire in 2 months. The first widget on the first page typically would tell you, oh, there's a one click and you can renew your car insurance with a discount. Or we know that you have loyalty points that you haven't spent from your credit card, then, you could click and you can go through. So that's how we try to customize so that the experience, we can have the deep vertical expertise, which is served by each of our companies. That's why I have 10 companies. Each one of them needs to be really good at what they do. At the same time, we have this Anyway door such that the users could circulate around anytime that they want to, just like in a big department store.
Gotcha. So here's a little bit tougher question. As you may know, in the United States, there's been a lot of criticism of the things that happen on the big platforms and who bears that responsibility. So for example, if a doctor maybe gave bad advice to a patient, who takes responsibility for that? How do you handle the responsibility of the things that happen on your ecosystem or your platform?
Yeah, that's a tough one. When you're dealing with so many people, it's really tough to ensure a level of consistency, quality. So one of the things, there are a few things we do to try and mitigate that risk, right? The first one, like I said, which we have a very strong in-house team. Unlike some of the other players, they primarily rely on part-time. We actually, on the reverse, we actually primarily rely on our own full-time. Even though that's much more expensive. And we have a very strict, so they almost work, actually we can better manage them as if it were they in the hospital, right? With the volume that we're getting, it's equivalent to 100 large hospitals in China. But because they're all sitting together, I mean, if you visit us in Shanghai, you see where our doctors sit. They have strict things that they have to follow. It's actually even better kind of adherence to guidelines and stuff than in a hospital where they may not have as much kind of technology enablement and procedures as we do. So that's one thing we use to mitigate the risk. The second thing is that even for the part-time doctors, what we're doing is we build workstations that they have to, if they take kind of patients from us, we'll try to get them to use our kind of a diagnostics tool and patient record tool, so that we don't just introduce, unlike some of perhaps the other time, we don't see ourselves, oh, I'll just refer you and that's it, right? That's the end of my role. We try to make sure that if you're providing the service on my platform, you have to adhere to, so we have certain tools and stuff so that we make sure that things are being recorded and things. So this is the second part that we try to do, mitigate the risk as much as possible. But still, I mean, there will always be residual risk because there are just so many people. So we also provide, like I said, we ask that basically the doctors and we have insurance to protect against any kind of problems that might arise along the way.
Gotcha. So a lot of your career has been in technology, and you've amassed a lot of data, and you're investing heavily in AI. I'm interested in, are you breaking new ground? Are you finding that you're using AI algorithms and tools developed by other companies and then basically deploying them, or are you breaking new ground and really innovating around the application of AI?
Yeah, we found that we really have to build our own capabilities. That's one of the things that I joined Ping An about 8 years ago, and with the amount of so many different use cases and stuff, we really had to build our own capabilities. So we've grown from when I joined, we only have about 4,000 engineers. We now have 34,000 engineers, and so a lot of these we have to build ourselves. Some of the examples, just to show, because I mean, as you well know, I mean, AI has been in existence for 60 plus years, so itself is not new. Of course, there are new algorithms coming out all the time. What I personally believe, why it hasn't really taken off, is that it's not just about having the people and the algorithms, right, which everybody with money and access could have. It's really about having the use cases and the data, that you can merge them together to create something. And it's not easy, right? I mean, I have to personally champion even internal projects to make sure our teams work together to do that. So I'll give a few examples. So one example, for example, we have contact center. We have 84,000 contact center agents a couple of years back. Every day we answer our inbound, outbound calls is 6 million calls a day. Right? Wow. So that's, I mean, I come from Singapore, which is really small. So I always joke our entire contact center can call on whole of Singapore in one day. So, and when you have so many of them, so the first thing we tried to do was, of course, migrate them to apps and stuff, right? But when you have 200 million financial services, there's a group of them who really likes to call you all the time. So, we've, over the past 3 years, been able to now 85% of our customer service queries be answered by robots.
Okay.
Be text robots or voice robots. I think the voice robot was the real breakthrough for us. I mean, there's a lot of chat bots out there,
sure,
varying degrees of intelligence and level of efficacy, but to have voice robots that speak to you as if you were a normal person for sales and service is really breakthrough. And to do that was really, really tough, because what we had to do was, we had to get through all the recordings. We had to get our people to mark them, for different product, different type of customer, what's the best scripts, different dialect, accents in China. I mean, just one dialect, we have 1,400 people trying to mark what the right lingo, etc. is, and then have them practice.
So this is like Amazon's Alexa.
Yes, but even more professional, because we're talking about people coming, asking about any question from your credit card to your insurance policy that we might have sold 10 years ago, and we're having voice robots answer that, right? I mean, to give one specific example in the consumer context, it used to be we have these orphan policies. So basically, you are an insurance customer of ours, but your agent may have left you. So one of the first things we do was we will call you. I would say, I'm sorry, your agent left, but as a service, here's a free rider, I'll give it to you, right? And in the past, when our humans call 100 customers, only 8 of them take up that free rider. Okay. Because it's really tough business. After our voice robot learned really the past kind of 2 years, the top guys, how they do it, 35% of them take up the rider, pure voice robot. So today, our voice robot call and talk to the humans as if it were a real person. So I think that's one of the breakthrough. It shows an example of what it takes in these days when you talk about AI breakthrough. Mm-hmm. I mean, our algorithm has made, frankly, leaps and bounds to do that, our scientists, but a lot of them are not within the context and scenario. You don't have the use cases, you don't have the data, you have to work together, right? We have to force our best agent, our best assessor to work with the data scientists so that you can codify not just with the data, but also their kind of domain knowledge, if you will, so now we are able in any of the scenarios exceed the average and actually benchmark to the top 10% of the people. So that's how we think about doing our AI.
Wow, great. So I have a question about your international ambitions, if you have. Are you looking at overseas markets? Do you have activities overseas? And if so, what are your plans?
We have a unique approach to international. I think China is really big. So our core business, I know 564 million users are in China. We've taken deliberately a technology enablement approach to international. Because no matter what country, I mean, I used to be at McKinsey and looked after our Southeast Asia. Even in Southeast Asia, you talk about the 10 countries, they're maybe smaller, but they have their own unique challenges and characteristics. So we don't want to go and compete in each of the markets because we think that over the past 32 years, the unique knowledge to build up in the channel, the customers, it's difficult to replicate. But what we do is our tech businesses go overseas because, as I said, it's what's unique about us is the B2B tech enablement piece. And technology is very exportable, right? It's language independent, it's market independent. So we've taken first our fintech. So One Connect is in 10 countries outside of China. We serve actually most of the large financial institutions, regulators outside. Then our Good Doctor and also Smart Healthcare is now also in Southeast Asia and Japan. So that's, I think, our approach. Hopefully, we'll be able to take these lessons that have been encoded in our tech platform to help also accelerate some of the development in other markets.
And that would include your voice technology?
Yes. We now have an English version, a Cantonese version, hopefully at some point in time a Japanese or something version.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. So last question is around, the world is facing a massive shock that is both a healthcare crisis, it's morphed into an economic crisis, and now we have social crises happening. So what's your outlook? You're in a very important position in the company and interested in your thinking about what is 2021. How do you do strategic planning given all the uncertainty that's happening in the market?
This is an interesting time. I think both because of the COVID, but also because of the economic and, political dynamics globally uncertain. Well, I think for us, in the short term, there will definitely be impact. I think China, relative to the rest of Asia, having gone through the COVID a bit earlier, has pretty much resumed as much as possible in business. So I think in that sense, China is relatively lucky. So we're cautiously optimistic that hopefully this year China should be about 3% GDP growth or so. But it is nonetheless still impacted. I think what we're focusing, particularly in my role, I have a wonderful role that I think it's amazing to think about how to use technology to enable ecosystems. So I've been fortunate to be tasked with kind of looking more forward. And so I remain cautiously optimistic that actually I think some of these actually sometimes spur the adoption of these from consumer standpoint, from regulator standpoint, from actually the professional standpoint, right? The healthcare was a great example. We've been, pushing at online healthcare for 6-7 years, and it's incredibly difficult to sometimes get consumer to accept that actually even simple things is okay. 34% of things can be done online perfectly. Even the regulators for a long time wouldn't reimburse social health insurance online, right? And that changed during the COVID because they saw the necessity to do so. For corporates as well, we had corporates reaching out to us whereby they say, they would like to provide such things for their employees and doctors too, right? Doctors actually, sometimes professionals are the hardest to change their behavior and mindset. So I remain cautiously optimistic that I think, despite all the uncertainty, etc., there's still a lot of fundamental, improvements that can be made in healthcare, in education, We had traffic, and also smart elderly home care, which is also another big problem that we're working on. And I believe technology has a role to play a lot more for it. And then hopefully times like this gives people more receptiveness to want to work and how to do it.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate so much your time. Given the size and scale of the operations you're running, it's really, truly fascinating to hear about how you're describe, the complexities of your company, but also the consistency of the business model that you have, and also the power of technology to help drive solutions. So appreciate very much your time today.
Thank you, Peter. My pleasure.